car smells like rain and leather and something she can't name. It is 3 in the morning. The street outside is empty the way London streets are empty at this hour. Not abandoned, just holding its breath. The building through the windscreen is glass and steel and no visible signage, the kind of building that does not need to announce itself because the people who need to find it already know where it is. Abina Darko has her hands in her lap. She is wearing the same dress she wore to an event 6 hours ago, a deep rust-colored dress that she bought 3 months ago and told herself was for a special occasion, and tonight qualified, though not in the way she imagined when she bought it. Her catering boxes are in the boot of a different car entirely, somewhere across the city, because the evening did not go the way any evening was supposed to go. The man beside her has not spoken in 4 minutes. She knows because she counted. When the silence started, she told herself she would speak when she got to 60. She got to 64 times. His name is Luca Shin. 3 weeks ago she did not know that name. 3 weeks ago she did not know this car, this street, this building, this particular silence. 3 weeks ago her life was smaller and safer and she was beginning, in the careful way she did everything, to be okay with that. She says, "I didn't ask for any of this." He says, "I know." His voice is the same voice it always is, unhurried, like a man who has all the time in the world and has chosen to spend it here. She says, "If I walk in there with you, there is no version of this where I come out the same." He doesn't answer immediately. He looks at the building. Then he looks at her. Not the way people usually look at her, cataloging, assessing, deciding. He looks at her the way he has looked at her since the beginning, like she is something he is still working out how to hold on to without breaking. She looks at the building. She looks back at him. And then she does the thing she has been doing since she was 7 years old and her mother brought her to a new country and told her to be brave even when bravery felt exactly like fear. She opens the door. 3 weeks ago, Abina Darko sat across a restaurant table from a man who told her she was too big to love. Tonight she is walking into a building that could end everything or begin it, and the strangest part, the part she will never quite be able to explain to Amma or anyone else, is that somewhere in the 3 weeks between that restaurant and this car, in the space of a world she was never supposed to enter and a man she was never supposed to trust, she stopped being afraid of the wrong things. This is where it started. This is how it happened. And if you want to understand why that door opened, you have to go back to the Tuesday morning when it was just Abina and her kitchen and a life that was good and whole and braced, always, for the next thing that would try to take something from it. Abina Darko woke up that Tuesday at 5:43 in the morning, which was when she always woke up, not because of an alarm but because her body had been trained by years of early kitchen shifts to treat 5:43 as a reasonable hour to be alive and moving. She did not lie there. She never lay there. Lying there was for people who had not yet decided what their day was going to be, and Abina had been deciding her days since she was old enough to understand that nobody else was going to decide them for her. Her flat in Peckham was small and exactly right. 1 bedroom, a sitting room that doubled as her office when client calls ran late, and a kitchen that was, by any objective measure, too good for the size of the flat. She had spent money on the kitchen that she should have spent on other things and she had never once regretted it. The kitchen was where everything happened. The kitchen was where she thought. The kitchen was where she was most herself. Flour on her hands and something rising in the oven and the particular quiet of early morning London coming through the window that faced the brick wall. She had a client tasting in 4 days. The Albright Club, a private members club in Mayfair that had been running for 90 years and had, until very recently, also been running a catering contract with a supplier who had retired. The contract was up for open tender for the first time in a decade. Abina had submitted her proposal 8 weeks ago and 3 days ago she had received the call that moved her to the final stage. The contract was on the kitchen counter, next to her coffee. She did not look at it while she worked. She knew every line of it already. She looked at it the way you look at something you want badly enough that looking at it directly feels dangerous, a sideways acknowledgement, a brief and careful thing. She was working on the tasting menu when Amma arrived. Amma did not knock. Amma had not knocked since 2014 and Abina had long since stopped expecting her to. She arrived with a reusable bag containing fruit she had not been asked to bring and opinions she had not been asked for, which was also standard. She sat at the kitchen counter, picked up a small pastry that Abina had set aside for quality checking, and ate it in 2 bites before Abina could say anything. Abina said, "Those are samples, not snacks." Amma said, "They're both. The sample tells me it's good. The snack is me agreeing with the sample." She ate another one. Abina watched her and the wide expressive mouth did the thing it did when she was trying not to laugh and losing. She turned back to the counter. She picked up her piping bag. The kitchen smelled like cardamom and browned butter and the specific warmth of something made with care. This was the life. Tuesday at 6 in the morning with her best friend eating the samples and the contract waiting on the counter in 4 days until the tasting and everything still possible. This was the version she had built and chosen, and she was proud of it, genuinely, in the way you are proud of something you made entirely yourself. Amma said. Not looking up from the pastry, she was now dissecting with professional curiosity. How's Ryan? The piping bag kept moving. Abina's hands kept working. The beat before she answered was short enough that anyone who was not Amma would have missed it. She said, he's fine. Amma looked at her. Amma had been looking at Abina for 15 years and she had catalogued every variety of fine. She said, what kind of fine? Abina said, the regular kind. Amma picked up her coffee. She didn't push. That was the thing about Amma that people who didn't know her well always got wrong. They thought her directness meant she didn't know when to stop. She knew exactly when to stop. She stopped when the person she loved had already decided something and just hadn't said it out loud yet. She was patient enough to wait for the saying. The text from Ryan came in at 6:47. Abina glanced at it and the expression on her face did a thing. A small thing. A tightening around the eyes that was there and gone in under a second. Smoothed over before Amma could turn back from the window. But Amma had already turned back from the window. She said nothing. She made a note of the smoothing. She filed it. She said instead, where's he taking you tonight? Abina said, a restaurant called Noir. In Mayfair. Amma raised both eyebrows. She said, Mayfair. Okay. He's trying. Abina said, it's just dinner. Amma said, it's never just dinner in Mayfair, babe. She was right. It was not just dinner. That was the thing about Amma. She was always, without exception, right about everything approximately 48 hours before Abina was ready to admit it. If you are watching this from London, drop your borough in the comments. I want to know how many of us are out here making something from scratch in a kitchen that is too good for the flat it's in. That evening, Abina wore the rust-colored dress. She did her hair and her hands were steady and she told herself, in the cab on the way to Mayfair, that this was going to be a good night. Ryan had been attentive lately. He had been making plans. A restaurant like Noir was a gesture, a visible, deliberate gesture, and she was going to sit across from him and enjoy it and not run the monitoring system because the monitoring system was a habit, not a prophecy, and she was choosing tonight to believe in the difference. Noir was everything she expected from a name like that and an address like that. Low lighting, the kind that made everyone look like they were in a film. Tables far enough apart that conversations could be private. Staff who moved with the specific quiet efficiency of people who had been trained to disappear until they were needed. The clientele were the kind of people Abina had spent her career catering for, not quite knowing, people who inhabited rooms like this the way she inhabited her kitchen. Like they had never once considered the possibility of not belonging. Ryan was already there. He stood when she came in and he kissed her on the cheek, and his cologne was expensive and his suit was the dark, controlled, impeccable suit he always wore, and for a moment, just a moment, she thought, this is fine. This is good. This is the version. They ordered. They talked. The monitoring system was quiet. And then somewhere between the first course and the second, something shifted. She didn't catch it immediately. It came in the way Ryan's eyes moved, briefly and carefully, to the table beside theirs and then back to her. The way his posture changed, a straightening, a recalibration, something being managed. The way he picked up his wine glass and then set it back down without drinking. She noticed it the way she noticed everything. Too late to stop what was coming and exactly early enough to brace for it. He said her name. The way people say a name when they have rehearsed what comes after it. She set down her fork. He said, I've been thinking. About us. About where this is going. She said, okay. He said, I should have said this earlier. I thought you would, I don't know, handle some things. Before it got to this point. The monitoring system was running at full capacity now. She said nothing. He said, Abina, you're a beautiful woman. You're talented. You're great company. But the way you look right now, the size of you, it's not something I can be seen with long term. I have a certain image. A certain professional profile. And I think you know what I mean. You're too big. For this. For what I need my life to look like. The restaurant went still. Not literally. The conversations at other tables continued. The staff moved. The lighting did not change. But in the specific geography of that moment, the world contracted to the space between Abina's face and Ryan Cho's, and everything outside that space became very far away. She did not cry. She was not going to cry. She had a specific relationship with public displays of pain, which was that she did not have them, not because she was made of stone but because she had learned very young that the people who made you cry in public were counting on the crying to be the story, and she was not going to let Ryan Cho's cruelty become about her response to it. She was absolutely still. Eyes unwavering. The smile was gone. She was in the process of deciding whether to stand when the man at the next table turned in his chair. He did not stand. He did not raise his voice. He did not make a performance of anything. He simply turned, and he looked at Ryan Cho with a quality of attention that was so utterly devoid of aggression and so completely full of consequence that Ryan's next sentence evaporated before it formed. The man said quietly, "I think you should leave." 3 words. Flat. The tone of a man who was not asking. Ryan looked at him. He took in the dark blazer, the watchful eyes, the absolute stillness of a man who had already decided how this was going to go. Something in Ryan's calculation shifted. He picked up his jacket. He said something low and defensive that nobody at the nearby tables could fully hear, and then he left. And then the man looked at Abina. Not at the situation. She had been looked at 1,000 times in her life. Desired and assessed and catalogued and dismissed and desired again. She knew every variety of being seen and not seen. She had a taxonomy for it, built from years of careful observation and one very specific heartbreak. She did not have a category for this. He was not assessing her. He was not calculating. He was looking at her the way you look at something you recognize without being able to explain the recognition, certain and unhurried and without agenda. Like she was not a situation to manage. Like she was simply a person, specifically herself, and he had noticed. The silence between them lasted approximately 3 seconds. Felt like something much longer. Like the specific feeling of standing at the edge of something and understanding, in your body before your mind catches up, that the ground behind you is already gone. He said, "My name is Luca Shin, and I apologize for what you just heard." His voice was quiet and unhurried. No performance in it. No rescue narrative. Just a man introducing himself across the space where something terrible had just happened, as though the terrible thing had simply cleared a path. She said her name. Her voice was steady. Her hands in her lap were not quite steady, but the table hid that. He said, "I have a table and a bottle of wine that is significantly better than whatever he ordered. If you would like to finish your evening in something resembling peace, you are welcome to." She looked at him for a moment. The monitoring system ran its check. She said, "I don't know you." He said, "No. But you know that the alternative is leaving, and I don't think you came to Mayfair tonight to leave early." Something in that landed. Not the logic of it. The specific quality of it. He had read something true about her in approximately 4 minutes, and he had said it without making it a manipulation. He was simply, accurately, right. She picked up her wine glass. She moved to his table. "Now, before I tell you what happened next, I need to ask you something. Because we have all met Ryan Cho. Maybe not in Mayfair. Maybe not in a restaurant at all. But we have all sat across from someone who was supposed to see us and chose instead to measure us. Drop a comment and tell me. Did you leave? Or did you stay and shrink? Because what Abina does next, most of us never get the chance to do." 3 hours later, on the other side of the city, in an office that did not appear in any public directory, a man named Harlan sat across a desk from a woman he employed to find things out. She set a photograph on the desk. It was a photograph taken through the window of noir, slightly blurred from distance. 2 people at a table. One of them was Luca Shin. The other one was Abina Darko. Harlan looked at the photograph for a long time. He said, "Who is she?" The woman told him what she had found in 4 hours of searching. A catering business. A final stage tender for a major Mayfair contract. A social media presence that was warm and public and entirely untethered to anything in Luca's world. Harlan said, "Does he know her?" The woman said he sat with her for 3 hours. He put her in a car himself. Harlan said, "Good. Find out everything." He slid the photograph back across the desk and looked out the window at the London skyline, and the expression on his face was the expression of a man who had just found the pressure point he had been looking for. Abina did not know any of this. She was in the back of a car that Luca had arranged, her rust-colored dress slightly creased from 3 hours of sitting, her wine glass having been refilled twice, and she was looking out the window at the city she had lived in for 24 years and feeling, for the first time in a very long time, like she had taken up exactly the right amount of space. He had not asked her what Ryan said. He had not made her recount it or process it out loud. He had simply started talking, in that unhurried way, about something entirely different, something that required her to respond rather than reflect, and within 20 minutes she had been pulled so completely out of the gravity of what Ryan had done that she was laughing. Not politely, actually laughing. She had noticed somewhere in the second hour that he had a notebook, slightly battered, dark cover, sitting on the table beside his wine glass. He had not written in it during their conversation, but his hand had rested near it twice, briefly, like a reflex he had caught and stopped. She had not mentioned it, but she had noticed. She had also noticed, though she would not have admitted this to anyone including Amma, that when she talked about the Albright contract his attention shifted quality. It was already full attention, but something in it became more specific. He asked one question, a single, precise question about what the contract would mean for the scale of her operation, and it was such an accurate question, so exactly the right question rather than the polite surface question, that she had answered it fully before she realized she was talking about her business to a stranger in a Mayfair restaurant at 10:30 at night. She thought about that in the car. The quality of the question. The way it suggested he had been listening not just to the words but to what the words were built around. She told herself it was nothing. He was clearly a man who was good at listening. It was probably professional. Probably meant nothing. She looked out the window. The city moved past. The monitoring system ran quietly in the background, looking for the gap between what he said and what he would say through the wall. Found nothing. That was the problem. Kept finding nothing. And the absence of something to find was, for a woman who had taught herself to listen for danger in the spaces between words, almost more disorienting than danger itself. She got home at 11. She stood in her kitchen for a long time without turning on the light. Then she turned on the light and she made a small batch of shortbread because that was what she did when something had happened that she did not yet have the language for. She stood at the counter in her rust-colored dress and she made shortbread at 11 o'clock at night, and she told herself she was not going to think about the look. She thought about the look. He called her the next morning. Not a text. A call. She looked at the number for 3 rings before she answered, and when she did her voice was exactly the voice she used in professional contexts, measured and warm and positioned at a careful distance. He said, "I wanted to check that you were all right." She said, "I'm fine. Thank you for last night." He said, "You said that already. In the car." She said, "I know. I'm saying it again." A pause. Not an awkward pause. A pause that had something in it, a consideration, a decision being made. He said, "I'd like to see you again. Not as a rescue. Just as 2 people who had a decent conversation and could probably have another one." The monitoring system activated immediately. She said, "I don't think that's a good idea." He said, "Why not?" She said, "Because I don't know you." He said, "You know, I prefer the wine on the left side of the menu because I find the right side shows off rather than delivers. You know, I was in London for a meeting that is not going the way I planned. You know, I think the Albright contract is worth more than the number they put on it and you should negotiate before you sign. You know, I take my coffee without sugar. You know, I find silence more useful than most conversations. You know more about me than most people I have known for years." A pause. She was standing in her kitchen. The shortbread from the night before was on the counter. She said, "That's an argument, not a reason." He said, "I know. Will it work anyway?" She didn't answer immediately. The monitoring system was running. It was finding nothing. The absence kept expanding. She said, "1 coffee. During the day. Public place." He said, "Fine." She could not tell, and she was aware of this, whether there was something in that fine that was warmer than a fine needed to be, or whether she was reading warmth into a man who was simply direct and she had simply forgotten what direct without agenda felt like. She told herself she was going to find out and then be sensible about it. She was not going to be sensible about it. But that comes later. The coffee was in a place in Soho that Abina chose because she knew it and it was busy, and busy meant exits and exits meant options. She arrived 4 minutes early, which was not her habit. She told herself this was because she had a meeting after, which she did not. He arrived exactly on time, which she would later understand was always how he arrived, not as a performance of punctuality but because arriving late to anything was, in his specific psychology, a form of disrespect he was constitutionally unable to offer. He sat across from her and there was a moment, the first moment of daylight between them, the first moment outside the specific atmosphere of noir and what happened there, where they both simply looked at each other and took the measure of the other without the emergency to hide behind. She thought, "He is very still for someone who is clearly always thinking." He thought, "Her hands do not match the rest of her carefully assembled composure, and that is the most interesting thing about her. and he was already aware that he should not be cataloging the interesting things. He ordered coffee. He did not look at his phone. He had the notebook in his jacket pocket. She could see the corner of it. He did not take it out. They talked for 2 hours. She missed the meeting she did not have. She walked back toward the tube and she called Amma while she walked, and Amma answered on the second ring because Amma always answered on the second ring. First ring was too eager and third ring was too casual, and second ring was the ring of a woman who had been waiting for this call. Abina said, "I don't know what this is." Amma said, "I know what it is." Abina said, "You don't know anything." Amma said, "I know that you called me immediately after, which means it was good enough to need to talk about and too uncertain to sit with alone. Which means it's something. Which means I'm right." Abina said, "It's probably nothing." Amma said, "Okay." Abina said, "He asked a question about the business that was very specific." Amma said, "Aha." Abina said, "And he has a notebook." A pause. Then Amma said, with the full weight of a woman who had been right about everything since 2009. "Abina. Baby. My best friend in the world. The notebook means what you think it means." Abina said, "It means he takes notes. Probably for work." Amma said, "Okay." She was right. She was, as always, right. But neither of them knew yet exactly how right she was or what the notebook actually contained. That was coming. But not yet. What came first was the third meeting. And the fourth. The pattern that developed without either of them announcing it. Luca was in London for a deal that kept not closing, kept requiring one more day, one more conversation, one more week, and in the evenings when the day's negotiations ended without resolution, he would send a message, and the message would be something brief and specific, never a question and never a demand, always an observation that assumed she would respond, and she always responded, and they always ended up somewhere. Restaurant, his building's terrace, twice in the kitchen of his rented apartment, always starting as a brief thing and always becoming hours. She noticed the pattern at the end of the second week. She noticed it and she noted it and she filed it under things that need to be examined, and she did not examine it because examining it would require naming it, and naming it would require deciding what to do about it, and she was not yet ready to decide. He was careful with her. Not careful the way careful usually meant, careful in the way of a man managing something fragile. Careful in the way of a man who had taken a precise inventory of how she moved through the world and was making adjustments accordingly, quietly, without announcing the adjustments. He did not push. He did not declare. He did not make anything into a bigger thing than it needed to be in the moment it was in. But he was always there. Between her and the door. Between her and the cold. Positioned, always, in the place that made most sense if you were someone who had decided, without words, to be the thing standing between someone and whatever was coming. She was starting to feel it. The specific warmth of being paid attention to by someone who was not paying attention to an idea of you but to the actual, particular, complicated, full-figured, scarred-handed, early morning working reality of you. The monitoring system was getting quieter. She was trying not to notice that it was getting quieter. And on the other side of the city, Harlan's woman had found everything she needed to find, and Harlan had made his decision, and the pieces were already moving, and Abina had no idea at all. The night things shifted started with the deal. Luca had been in 3 days of negotiations with a man named Doyle, a financial facilitator who was the final link in a chain that Luca had been building for 3 years. Doyle was stalling. He was a man who stalled when he was afraid, and someone was making him afraid, and Luca needed to understand who. He met with Mina that afternoon in the office that had no public address. Mina set a folder on the desk and she set it with the particular care of someone who knows the contents are going to change the temperature of the room. She said, "His name is Harlan. He runs a competing network, based out of Rotterdam, trying to establish London infrastructure. He's been watching you for 8 months. He knows about the Doyle deal. He's been pressuring Doyle directly, which is why Doyle is stalling." Luca said, "What's his leverage over Doyle?" Mina opened the folder. Then she said, "There's something else." She put a photograph on the desk. Noir. Through the window. 2 people at a table. She said, "He identified her 11 days ago. He's been watching her. Her business, her flat, her movements. He intends to use her as pressure on you." She did not editorialize. She did not look at Luca with anything other than the steady, assessing attention that had made her indispensable for 8 years. But she was watching his hands. His hands were completely still. He said, "How much does he have on her?" Mina said, "Nothing real. Photographs of you together. He's working on a constructed file, financial records spliced with yours, enough to look convincing to someone who doesn't know what they're looking at." Luca said, "Has she been approached?" Mina said, "Not yet. He's building first." A long silence. Then Luca said, "Put someone on her building." Quiet. "She doesn't know." Mina made a note. She did not say, "She's important to you." She did not say, "This is the first time in 8 years you have protected someone who is not part of the operation." She simply wrote it down and moved to the next item. But she filed it. The same way Amma filed things. The way women who love difficult people learn to file the things that matter before the people who matter are ready to say so. Luca did not tell Abina. He turned this over for a day. He thought about telling her. He thought about the monitoring system he had observed running beneath her composed surface, the specific way she went still when something felt like a threat, the particular care with which she managed the distance between herself and the possibility of being hurt. He thought, if I tell her, she leaves. She will make the sensible calculation and she will leave and she will be safer for leaving and that will be the right outcome for her and the wrong outcome for him. He had not let himself think in terms of wrong outcomes for himself in 15 years. He noticed that he was thinking in those terms now. He noticed it and did not examine it because he was, in this specific way, exactly like her, capable of filing the things he was not ready to name. He told himself he was protecting her. He was not wrong about that. But he was not entirely right about it either. She found the notebook on a Thursday afternoon. She was in his office waiting for him. He was on a call in the next room that had run long. She was at the table with her own work spread out in front of her because they had developed, without discussing it, a habit of working in the same space in the late afternoons, and she knocked the notebook off the edge of the table when she reached for her phone. She picked it up. The page fell open. She was not going to read it. She looked at it. And she read it. It was not operational notes. It was not a list of assets or contacts or the kind of information she had half expected to find in the notebook of a man like Luca Shin. It was small, personal. The name of the pastry she had mentioned once, exactly once, in passing, that her mother used to make for New Year, the Ghanaian name of it written in his slightly pressed handwriting. The time she had mentioned she worked best in the early morning before the city woke up. A note that said, holds her breath before uncertain sentences. Another that said, the word she uses when something delights her is the word her mother used. 3 pages back. Negotiation advice for the Albright tasting that she had never received because he had stopped himself from offering it unsolicited. She stood in the middle of his office with the notebook in her hands and the monitoring system ran its check and found nothing. Not because there was nothing to find. Because everything it found was the opposite of what it was looking for. He had been paying attention. Not to her as a variable. Not to her as a piece of something useful. To her. To the specific, particular, irreducible her of her. He had been collecting the evidence of her existence the way you collect the evidence of something you don't want to forget. She was still holding the notebook when Mina came in. Mina looked at the notebook. She looked at Abina. Her expression gave nothing away but her hands. For just a moment, were very still. She said, Luca will be 2 more minutes. There's something you both need to hear when he's done. The something was Harlan. The full picture. The photographs. The constructed file. The 11 days of watching. Abina heard it with the stillness that was her armor and she kept the stillness all the way through and she asked 2 questions in the precise, practical voice she used when she needed to think clearly, and she set the notebook down on the table very carefully and she waited for Luca to come through the door. He came through the door and he looked at Mina first, which was how she knew he already knew what Mina had just told her, and then he looked at Abina, and the quality of that look was the look from the restaurant, the first look, the look she had been carrying in the back of her monitoring system without a category for 11 days. She said very quietly, How long have you known? He said, 3 days. She said, And you didn't tell me. He said, No. She said, Why? He didn't answer immediately. He sat down across from her. He looked at the notebook between them. He looked at her. He said, Because I knew what you would decide. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that decides things. She said, You were protecting me. He said, Yes. She said, From a danger I walked into by sitting at your table. He said, Yes. She said, And you thought the best way to protect me was to keep me in the dark. He said, I thought if you knew, you would leave. And you would have been right to leave. I knew that. I kept you close anyway. She stood up. She picked up her things. The monitoring system was running at full capacity, processing, categorizing, looking for the verdict through the wall, and what it found this time was the very specific thing it had always been waiting to find. Evidence that the person across from her had made a calculation about what was good for them at her expense and called it care. She said, Thank you for dinner. For the company. For whatever this has been. And I'm sorry about your deal. She left. He let her go. He sat in the office for a long time. The notebook was still on the table. He looked at it without touching it. Then he said to Mina, who had not moved, "The deal closes tomorrow. Tell Doyle we're moving forward. And I need everything we have on Harlan's constructed file against Abina. Everything. Pull it all." Mina said, "And then what?" He said, "And then we give it to her. All of it. Without conditions." Mina said, "She hasn't agreed to anything." He said, "I know." Mina said nothing. She made a note. She filed the thing she was not going to say out loud, the thing that was, "This is the first time in 8 years you have given something without a return built in, and you are doing it for a woman who just walked out of your office, and that means something so specific and so large that I am going to write it down in my own notebook tonight and I am not going to tell you I did." The deal closed the next morning. Doyle signed. 3 years of work resolved in 40 minutes over a conference call, and when it was done, Luca sat in the quiet office and did not feel the satisfaction he had expected to feel. He felt the absence of the conversation he would have had that evening, the one that started as a brief stop and became 2 hours, the one where she would have said something precise and warm about the closing and he would have watched her hands when she said it. He had 4 missed calls from a number he didn't recognize. He had 0 from her. He told himself this was fine. She was safe. The exposure was being handled. The file Harlan had been building would be neutralized before it reached anyone. She would never need to know exactly how close it came. He was wrong about the file. Harlan, in the final hours before Luca's people dismantled his position entirely, made one last move. He sent the constructed file to the Albright Club's general manager directly, marked urgent and confidential and containing enough spliced documentation to look, to someone who was not looking closely, like a concerning pattern of financial associations between a catering contractor and a known organized crime network. The general manager called Abina at 2 in the afternoon. She was in her kitchen. She had been in her kitchen since 7, working on the tasting prep because the tasting was in 48 hours and the work was the thing that made sense when nothing else did. And when the phone rang, she answered it with flour on her hands and a cautious hope still alive in her chest because the tasting was in 48 hours and she was good at this. She was genuinely excellent at this, and that had to count for something. The general manager was apologetic. He was genuinely apologetic, which almost made it worse. He said, "We have received some documentation that we are obligated to review. Pending that review, we are suspending the tender process for your business. We will be in touch." He said nothing else. He did not have to. She knew exactly what the documentation was. She stood in her kitchen with flour on her hands and the phone on the counter and the tasting menu in front of her and the contract that she had looked at sideways for weeks so that wanting it wouldn't feel dangerous, and she felt the floor go out from under her in the specific way that floors go out when the thing you were careful about wanting was exactly the thing you lost. She did not call Amma. She did not call Luca. She sat down on the kitchen floor, which she had never done before, and she sat there for a while. And then she got up. Because she had always gotten up. Because getting up was the one skill she had never had to learn. It had simply always been the next thing, and she washed her hands and she put the kettle on and she called Amma. Amma answered on the second ring. Abina told her. All of it. Harlan. The file. The call from the Albright Club. The notebook. What Luca had said. What she had decided. Amma listened to all of it without speaking. When Abina finished, the silence on the line was the silence of Amma computing something with the full processing power of a woman who loved her best friend and did not believe in sitting with her hands in her lap. She said, "I'm going to make some calls." Abina said, "Amma, don't." Amma said, "I'm not doing anything. I'm just going to make some calls." Abina said, "What calls?" Amma said, "The kind of calls a nurse with very good research skills and a lot of time on her hands makes when someone she loves has been set up by a man named Harlan whose last name I am going to find out in approximately 3 hours." Abina said, "Please don't get involved in this." Amma said, "Babe, I am already involved in this. I have been involved in this since I ate your samples on Tuesday morning. I will call you when I know something." She hung up. Abina looked at the tasting menu. She looked at the contract on the counter. She looked at her hands, the scarred knuckles, the flour still caught in the creases, the hands that had built everything in this kitchen from nothing, that had learned every skill she had through heat and effort and the specific education of getting things wrong until she got them right. She thought about what Luca had said. "I knew what you would decide. I kept you close anyway." She thought about the notebook, the name of her mother's pastry written in pressed handwriting, the word her mother used when something delighted her. She thought about the monitoring system and the wall and the thing she had been listening for through it, the gap between what someone said and what they said when she wasn't in the room. She thought about the fact that Luca had known she was in danger and had put people around her building before she knew she needed them, silently, without making it a conversation, without making her feel like a liability or a problem. She thought about the gap. The gap between what people say and what they do when there is no audience for the doing. He had done the doing without an audience. He had done it before she knew it was being done. That was not the behavior of a man managing a variable. That was the behavior of a man who had decided something and had not yet told her. She was still sitting with all of this when Amma called back. It had been 2 hours and 40 minutes, not 3 hours, because Amma, when motivated, was faster than she promised. Amma said, "Okay. Are you sitting down?" Abina said, "Yes." Amma said, "Luca Shin's people have been in contact with the Albright Club's legal team for the last 6 hours. They have submitted a complete rebuttal of the file, with original documentation demonstrating the splicing, and a certified account of Harlan's operation and his methods. The Albright Club's general manager has been on the phone with their lawyers since noon." A pause. Abina said, "When did he start?" Amma said, "The day before yesterday." The day before yesterday was the day after Abina had left his office. The day after she had walked out. Before she had agreed to anything. Before he had any reason to believe she was going to choose him over the sensible calculation. He had done it before she decided. He had given her the ending without the guarantee of anything in return. Amma said very quietly, "Abina." Abina said, "I know." Amma said, "Go find him." She went to Noir. Not to his office. Not to the building. To Noir, where it started, where Ryan Cho's cruelty had first cleared the space between them. She walked in a coat over her working clothes, flowers still faintly present somewhere in her hair, and she did not look like someone who had planned this, and she did not care. He was there. She would find out later that Mina had called him. She would find out later that Mina had said only, "She's coming to Noir," and that he had put on his jacket and left the office in the specific unhurried way of a man who had already decided and was simply allowing the situation to catch up. He was at a table. Not his original table from that first night. A different one, smaller, near the window. He was not eating. He had the notebook on the table, but he was not writing in it. She crossed the restaurant. She stopped in front of him, and neither of them said anything for a moment. Then she said, "You did it before I decided." He said, "I know." She said, "You did it without conditions." He said, "Yes." She said, "Why?" He looked at her for a long moment, the watchful open face with the early laugh lines, the face that gave nothing away to people who were not paying attention and gave everything away to people who were. He said, "Because I've known what you decided for longer than you have." The monitoring system ran its final check. It moved through every conversation, every look, every small action and quiet choice, the position in doorways and the quality of questions and the name of a pastry written in pressed handwriting. It ran the check and it came back with the same result it had been returning for 11 days, the result she had been refusing to accept because accepting it meant standing in it. There was nothing through the wall. There had never been anything through the wall. There had only ever been a man paying attention to the specific, particular, irreducible reality of her in the only way he knew how to pay attention, which was completely and without announcement and at actual cost to himself. She took 3 steps. She stopped close enough that the decision was visible and she waited. He stood up. He closed the distance. And the restaurant where she had been made small, held them both. Now, right now, before I tell you what came after, I need you to do something. If you have ever had someone choose you without conditions, without an audience, without needing you to see it to make it count, share this video. Send it to that person. Send it to the person who deserves to be chosen like that. Send it to yourself if you need the reminder that this is what it should feel like. This is the one. The Albright Club reinstated the tender 3 days later. The evidence was unambiguous, the file was demonstrably fabricated, and the general manager, who was a man of genuine conscience, sent a formal letter of apology and an expanded version of the original contract with a handwritten note attached that said simply, "We hope you will still want to work with us." Abina read the letter at the kitchen counter. She read it twice. She set it down next to the contract that she had been looking at sideways for weeks. Then she picked up both of them and she looked at them directly. She had a meeting with the Albright Club's events director in 2 weeks. She had a new tasting menu to build. She had a business that had survived something that was, in fact, stronger for having been tested, because the test had required producing documentation that also demonstrated the full depth of what Darko and company had built over 2 years, and what it had built was genuinely, undeniably excellent. She called Amma to tell her. Abina told her to stop being dramatic. Amma said through the crying, I am being exactly the right amount of dramatic. This is the correct amount of dramatic for this situation. Abina laughed. That evening she was in Luca's kitchen. She was there because she had somehow ended up in Luca's kitchen on the 3 previous evenings, and the evening before that, and the kitchen had become, without announcement or agreement, the place where the day ended. She was making something. She was always making something in a kitchen. It was simply how she occupied space. She was making the pastry her mother used to make. He was at the table with the notebook. He was not writing. She said, without turning around, "You're writing about me." He said, "I'm not writing anything." She said, "You're thinking about writing about me." A pause that was warm and long and entirely comfortable. He said, "Maybe." She turned around. The wide expressive mouth was doing the thing it had never quite done in all the weeks they had known each other. Fully, completely, unguarded, the smile arriving without reservation and without the monitoring system catching it and smoothing it back into safety. It arrived whole and real and specific, the smile of a woman who had decided. The laugh lines around Luca's eyes deepened in the way they deepened when something genuinely delighted him, which was rare enough that people who worked with him had stopped expecting it. He was watching her the way he had watched her since the beginning. Not cataloging. Not calculating. Simply watching, with the full and unhurried attention of a man who has found the thing he had not let himself know he was looking for, and has recognized it with a certainty so complete that there is nothing left to manage or protect against or hold at a careful distance. She brought the pastry to the table and set it in front of him. The one from the notebook. The one her mother made. He looked at it. He looked at her. She sat down across from him. She used to think that being chosen meant being found acceptable. That love was an evaluation with a good outcome. That the best you could hope for was to be measured and not found lacking. She had spent years building the measuring system into herself, running the audit, listening through the wall, waiting for the verdict. She understands now, sitting in this kitchen in the early morning of a life that is wider and warmer than the one she was braced for, with flour she didn't notice on her hands and a man across the table who wrote the name of her mother's pastry in his notebook and never offered it as leverage. She understands that being chosen actually means something much simpler and much more frightening. It means someone looked at all of it. Everything you carry. Everything that made you brace yourself just before someone said something kind. The scars on your hands and the monitoring system running quietly under your composure and the way you go still when something feels like a threat and the way your mouth does the thing before you can stop it when you decide to trust something. They looked at all of it. And they stayed. Not because you were enough. Because you were exactly right. If the story meant something to you, subscribe. Not because of the algorithm. Because there are more stories where this one came from. Stories about women who were made small and became something larger than the people who tried to reduce them. Stories about love that begins in the worst possible place and becomes the truest possible thing, and you deserve to be there when they come. Luca opened the notebook. He picked up the pen. He wrote something on the page. He turned it around and slid it across the table to her. She looked at it. She looked at him. The laugh lines were still there. They were going to be there for a long time. She took the notebook. She read what he wrote. She set it down. She reached across the table and she covered his hand with hers. The scarred, capable, warm hand of a woman who built everything she has from scratch and has just decided to build one more thing. The narrator's voice comes down. Not a trail off. A landing. Something's happened because the universe is arranging something it has been arranging for a long time, and all the terrible moments, the restaurants and the Ryan Chas and the public diminishments and the constructed files and the monitoring systems and the walls we listen through, all of them were just the path. The long way around to the kitchen. The long way around to the morning. The long way around to the person sitting across the table who wrote your mother's recipe in a notebook and does not make speeches about it. Drop a comment. Tell me who this made you think of. Tell me who you want to send it to at midnight with no message, just the link because they will know. Tell me about the morning after the long way around, if you have had one. And if you haven't had it yet, know this. It is still being arranged. The table is still being set. Go find your kitchen.